still, it is the passion of my heart to teach. And I've been teaching parenting for almost 30 years. And it is still one of my very favorite things to teach, although in fairness, I can say that about everything I talk about. I want to start by asking you guys this question. Who are some people that you interact with on a weekly or monthly basis? Just shout them out. Can you guys all hear me, by the way? Okay. Who are they? Your wife. Who else? Your boss. Your children, co-workers. So let's just say your parents, your siblings, your friends, neighbors, people at church, right? Your extended family, customers, vendors, boss, subordinates, co-workers. Of all those people that we just rattled off, which one type, which one relationship to you do you think you will exert the single greatest influence over in terms of another person's foundational development? Academic, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. Which one? I can't hear you. Thank you. I'm sorry. Even I can't hear you guys up here. Your kids. Let me ask you this question. Is there any other group among the people that we just rattled off that's a close second? There is not. How many of you wish you could have that kind of influence with your wife? I definitely do at times. Yeah, David's really enthusiastic back there. How many of you wish you could have that kind of influence with customers, or your subordinates, or your boss, or coworkers that you deal with, that you depend on? Right? No one else is a close second. The next most influence you'll ever have is a distant second. So number one, don't miss the opportunity. Don't miss the opportunity that you have. And even if your kids are grown, you may think you don't have that much influence. You have more influence than you think. And I'll touch on that. How many of you would agree that children are a gift from God? Amen. Right? And that's scriptural. Psalm 127 says, they're like a quiver full of arrows. And blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. But, gentlemen, have you ever thought that you are a gift from God to your children? Have you ever considered that? That you and your wife and their mother are one of God's most important provisions. I would argue, apart from Jesus Christ, you are God's most important provision for your children. And in Proverbs 17:6, it says, children's parents are the pride of their children. I would argue that you are one of God's most important provisions, if not his most important, apart only from Jesus Christ himself. Now, how many of you have had training to be parents? We're going to come back to that, Jim. Brett, what did you have? Growing Kids God's Way. So that was a really popular program for a while. I've taught a parenting class for years, so some people, if I had repeat customers in the class, they would raise their hand. Guys, this may be the most important thing I'm going to say this morning. Everybody in this room has been trained to be a parent. We have all been trained to be parents. Every one of us. What was that training, Jim?
Our parents and TV.
It was our parents. I'm going to say mainly it's our parents, all right? So that's what I call Parenting 101. We had 18 years of Parenting 101. We didn't know we were enrolled in it, and our parents didn't think about it probably. But we were in it for 18 plus or minus years. The class I teach, I call Parenting 201, because everybody in it's already been trained. Now here's the deal. Some of us had fantastic training in Parenting 101. Some of us had appalling, abysmal training in Parenting 101. Most of us, like me, had a blend of both. There were some really great elements and memories, and there were some things I wish just hadn't happened. You know, that my parents didn't know any better. They didn't get any training either, except from their own parents. So most of us have some combination, but in the absence of any decision to the contrary, you are generally going to parent a lot like the way you were parented. If your parenting was really awful, you may tend to completely go the other direction. That happens a lot, and sometimes you end up throwing the little pieces of good out that were there because the whole thing was that bad. But most of us are going to generally parent a lot like our parents unless we choose to do something differently. And for this, I'm going to refer you to Luke 6:40. A student is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he's been fully trained, will be like his teacher. You and your kid's mom will be the greatest continuity in their lives. You'll be the most consistent overtime factor. They've got teachers in school, they've got friends, they've got people in church. None of those people are with them for 18 years. You're with them for 18 years. You are the single most important continuity in your kids' lives. And so they are going to be like you, because if you had Parenting 101, what are your kids? If your kids are still at home, what are they enrolled in right now? They're enrolled in your Parenting 101, right? So you're teaching without realizing it. You are the professor. You and your wife are the professors for Parenting 101 for your kids if your kids are at home. Now, can you ever master parenting? You can master riding a bike, right? I'm really short-circuiting a fun illustration that I do when I teach the class. But when you learn to ride a bike at the beginning, you have to think about everything, right? You have to think about, you're thinking about balancing, you're wobbling between the training wheels, you're trying not to hit a curb and have a wreck, you're trying not to hit a parked car. After you go around the parked car, you got to come back to the curb because now you're in the middle of the street and you're trying not to hit the curb. You got to learn to stop. You have to learn to start. You have to think about everything. After you learn to ride a bike, how much thought goes into actually riding? Not much. You could have a conversation. You could be thinking about something else. It's the same thing with driving, right? You go on a long trip with your wife and the kids fall asleep and you realize you've been talking for an hour. You haven't really actually consciously processed anything on the road, right? People have got on the road, they've got off the road, they've passed you, you've passed them, and you don't remember any of it because you're on autopilot. Can you get to autopilot with parenting? Why not? Why not? Because your kids are a moving target. They are constantly changing. First of all, how many of you have more than one kid? That's fantastic. How old was your second child when you, Dad, realized he or she was not the same personality as your first child? How old? Day one. Day one. Okay, I've had moms tell me in the class they could tell before the babies were born, and I totally believe it. I totally believe the mom can tell by the behavior, the physical behavior of that child in her womb. I will tell you, as a typical guy, it takes me 6 to 8 weeks. When my kids were born, it was 6 to 8 weeks before I could really tell their personalities are different. And the reason is that's when they could smile. That's the first time I could get any feedback back from that child. And so the same collection of ridiculous faces and noises that elicited a smile from my oldest child didn't work on the second one. I had to come up with a whole new set of silly noises and faces and stuff to do to make her smile. That's when I could tell the personality differences. But let me tell you something, your kids are different. And even if you only have one, just when you've mastered how to parent that 3-year-old, what happens? He turns 4, right? That little booger turns 4. All of a sudden, you don't have a 3-year-old anymore. You've got a 4-year-old. Let me give you an illustration of this. You guys familiar with Candyland? Game Candyland? I hate Candyland. I literally hate Candyland because there's no strategy to it. The whole game, as soon as you shuffle the cards and put them down, the whole game has already been decided. You're just waiting to see what it is. You're not making any choices. You're just turning the card over and doing exactly what it says. So I really hate Candyland. When my oldest son was about 3, he liked to play Candyland. So guess what we played? We played Candyland. Now, let's suppose when he was 10 or 15 years old, I said to him let's say after a day at high school, I said, Eric, hey, let's play some Candyland. You used to love that game. What would I get back from him? I'd get the eye roll. If he came home from college, right, for a weekend, Eric, hey, I got a real treat for us tonight, Candyland. He's 35 now. What if I said that to him today? That'd be ridiculous. I mean, he's a moving target, right? Your kids are a moving target, even in their adult lives. I know lots of us in here, like me, have grandchildren. Our kids are grown. But your adult kids are still a moving target. You don't get to master parenting. The great news is you get to keep learning about your kids, and there is nothing more interesting on this earth to keep learning about than your kids. How many of you have grandkids, by the way? Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. All right. How do we become more aware of how we're doing in parenting? What's our best sources of information?
From them.
From them that's a really big one. There's really two main sources of information. What are they? Two sources of feedback for you specifically about your parenting. What are they? I'm talking, Tommy, more about people who can tell you what they think. I think you're right. That's a good, evidential way to know about your parenting, and I think that's spot on. But who are they? Your wife. How many of you love to get advice from your wife, especially when you think you're doing something wrong? I'm no better at it. I'm really no better at that. But your wife sees everything. Who else sees everything? God does, but he doesn't speak to most of us, right, audibly. He does that way, Jim, and I would argue that. But on this earth, your two best sources are going to be your wife and who? Your kids. Your kids. And they may tell you things, especially when they're really young, that don't make sense in terms of adult feedback, but we need to be paying attention. When I teach this class, it's usually over 8 weeks or over 4 longer sessions. I drill this passage in to the parents' heads, but I think this passage is, to me, the most practical life passage in the scriptures. James 1:19 and 20, and I won't quote it exactly. I know I won't get it exactly right. But it essentially says this: brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak is next, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not work the righteousness of God. Now here's what I want you to remember. I want you to take this away. You should be quick to listen. Listen is active, right? Hearing, we're hearing stuff all the time. Listening means you are actively engaged. You are paying attention to what you're hearing. We should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. I'm going to tell you, I think that will serve you extraordinarily well in every area of your life. Work, friendships, parenting, marriage. So I drill that in. Training for life. On top of the fact that you're training your kids on how to be parents, you're training them in life. And they're enrolled in Life 101 with you. And they're going to be a lot like you, not just in their parenting, but in lots of ways. Now, let me ask you a question. My oldest son, I was always good at math. And I'm musical. I played musical instruments, not well enough to be an artist or anything like that, but I really enjoy music. And I'm pretty good at math. My oldest son, Eric, is really great at math. He's musical also. He's really good at history, and he's a sports fan. And I'm not really a sports fan. I know I have to give up my man card to say that, but I'm just not really much of a sports fan. He's really interested in different sports, and they've changed over time, and he's really good at history. Like, he remembers dates, places, people. I can't remember any of that stuff. How do we explain that difference? He's going to be just like me. How do we explain that? Any takers? That's right. Who's the other half, Tommy? Okay, so my wife. That's right. We can be sure of that, right? So that's right. So my wife explains the interest in sports. She's the sports fan between the two of us. But she's not any good at history either. So how do we explain that? So let me make a really important distinction here. When I say your kids are going to be a lot like you, I'm not talking about math or history. I'm not talking about stuff that's skills and aptitudes. I'm talking about the way they process things, the way they look at the world, the way they evaluate and decide what's important. Their sort of worldview, their view of eternity, their view of God. Those are the kind of things, not the skill set, but the character the integrity, the attitude toward things, prioritizing what's important. That's where they're going to be like you. Some of your kids are artists and you're not, and some of you are artists and you've got kids that are. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the hardwired stuff. We're talking about the soft stuff, the character, the things that they do absorb from us. And they're every bit as important. How many of you wonder sometimes if you can do this parenting thing? I want you to, let me ask you this question. How many of you have struggled with a decision? Like, should I buy that house or should I stay in the house I'm in? Should I buy a new car or should I keep the car I've got that's got 100,000 miles? Tommy wants you to keep it because he'll fix it for you. Should I take this other job? Right? There's a somewhat high stakes decision. How many of you wish you knew what God's will was for those decisions? You really knew what it was. Amen. I mean, we get clarity on these things over time, but it's not like we can just look at it and go, I already know right now this is what I'm supposed to do. That's really hard. How many of you struggled with moving to be nearer your extended family? Or like nearer kids or nearer your parents? Or something like that. Let me tell you something really cool about parenting. If you have kids, it is God's will for you to be their dad. You don't have to wonder about that. You don't have to ask God about it. You don't have to ask for advice about it. If you have kids, whether they're biological or they're adopted, it is God's will. I can tell you up here 100%. It is God's will for you to be their dad. It's God's will for you to be their father. You don't have to wonder about it. You may wonder which job, which house, which car. You don't have to wonder if that's a role you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have it. Because nobody gets that role without God giving those kids to us. Those kids are a gift from God. And they are right from his hand. So if you've got kids, you can do it. And I want someone else to look up 1 Thessalonians 5:24. I want you guys to remember this concept too. Anyone just shout it out when you got it. It's the race of the Bible apps. Yep, say it louder, Kate.
He who calls you is faithful. He will surely do it.
He who calls you is faithful, and he will surely do it. Or the version I'm more used to, he will bring it to pass. Right? God, you don't have to wonder if you're called to be a dad. You are. If you've got kids, you're called. In this passage, Paul is telling us and the Thessalonians that God is faithful. If he's called you, he will bring it to pass. If we will tap into him, he will do it. Now, I want to talk about two more things here real quick. One is, how many of you guys have ever run a red light? The rest of you are liars. Come on. Who's run a red light in here? Come on. I think I ran a red light in the last week sometime. I don't know. How many of you ever run a red light and then as you were sailing through the intersection, you glance over and there's a policeman? Yeah, that's happened a few times, right? How many of you have been approaching an intersection, saw the policeman, and still ran the red light? Anybody? I've done that. I'll bet I've done that a dozen times in my life. I've approached an intersection, seen the policeman, and rolled right through it. Why would I do that?
Rebellious.
I'm rebellious. There's a guy who knows me really well. You know why I did that? Who said that? Have you heard me say this before, Kate? Okay, so it's okay. It's okay. We're good. We were going to get there in about 5 more seconds anyway, so it's okay. As I approach the intersection, the policeman is standing in the middle, and what's he doing? He's going like this. So I can see the red light. I know the rules. But when the policeman is doing this, what does that do? It changes the rules, right? What would happen if I came to that intersection and I stopped? What would happen? He would not be happy about it. He'd start yelling at me, come on. He's got a job to do, and his job is to move traffic through that intersection in some unusual circumstance where there's lots of cars coming from one direction. So I'm stopping him from doing his job if I'm blocking all the cars behind me. So here's my point. With your kids, before you react, I'm going to go back to James 1:19. Before you get angry because they did something that obviously they shouldn't have done, You need to make sure you understand how they saw the intersection. How did they see the rules? Did they understand the red light? Or don't they? Are we assuming too much? Because we're the big people. We're the people who do understand. We have to make sure it's our job to make sure our kids get it before we decide to call them on something, to discipline them. Say it again, Bruce. Well, I'm going to come back to our roles as grandparents too. But yeah, that's right. So you need to know how they understand the rules before you deal with something that's happening. I want all of you guys, I want you to all close your eyes and put your heads down and raise one hand. Raise one hand high in the air. I want you to point north. Don't look. Don't anybody look. Just point north. Now I want everyone to keep your hands where they are, and everybody open your eyes and look around. Now it's easier in this building. Now I saw that. So what's your name? Derek. Derek, are you just being bad? Are you just a rebellious child? Or what's the matter with you? I asked you to point north, didn't I? What happened? You were pointing this direction. You're pointing like southwest or something. What's going on over there? I mean, what's Derek's problem? Greg, what do you think? Okay, so who else? You thought so with that. Who else did that? Derek, thanks for letting me pick on you. You know, it's really hard. Like in my church, by the time you get to the classroom, you're all turned around. So half the class is in this building. You walk in one door, you walk in one order, everybody knows where north is. I was afraid I wouldn't have anyone. Derek, thank you for not pointing north today. I was afraid I wouldn't have anyone that wasn't pointing north. I think there was one more. I think you were. Tell me your name. Brian? So is it Brian? Okay, so Brian and Derek, are they just being bad? What's the matter? Why didn't they point north? Perception. Did they do their best? So do you guys think that Brian and Derek did their best to point north? Should I just discipline them right off the bat because they didn't do what I asked? I can hear you, David. Yeah, there you go. There you go. I'm going to get that out in a second, but I'm going to have you come up, David, and do that. So here's the deal. We need to understand, right, what's going on in their mind before we deal with something. That's on us. We're the big people. They're the little people. Not that they're growing like mine, but I mean, they're the little people. That's on us. I actually am going to use the baseball bat, so David, come on up here. David, you stand. Come on up here. You stand here. I'm going to stand over here. David, you are 5 years old, and I'm your baseball coach. Okay, go ahead, David, and hold the bat up for me. Good. Okay, can you turn a little bit? That's great. David, that looks pretty good. Can you raise your sour elbow for me? David, your sour elbow? Can you, David, come on. I got other kids I got to be working with here. Okay, I'll tell you what. Oh, I believe that. Okay, listen, I'll tell you what. Just gargle the bat for me. Gargle the bat a little bit. David, are you listening? I see your eyes, but you're not. Oh, that's the deal. Oh, okay. All right, what's David's problem? He doesn't understand what I'm saying. Whose fault is that? That's my fault. Okay, thanks, David. That's good. So here's the deal. I've never seen the bat gargled so well. Here's the deal. I saw that exact scene play out with one of my son's baseball coaches. It wasn't with my son, it was with one of the other boys. And the coach was one of our favorite coaches. We loved that guy. Like, we would have just stayed with him if he kept coaching. We would have stayed with him every season. But here's what I saw happen. The boy is standing there with the bat. And the coach says to him, lift your back elbow. And I want you to think about that through the eyes of a 5-year-old. What's your back elbow? You've learned left and right. Which one's the back elbow? Okay, I knew what he meant. He meant the one furthest away from the coach. The kid was clueless. Does he want to do what the coach wanted him to do? He did. Then the coach says to him, and I'll never forget the first time I heard these words. The coach says, choke up on the bat. Like the first time I ever heard that, I thought, what on earth are they talking about? Choke up on the bat. So I never played baseball after that. Choke up on the bat. This kid is looking clueless. The deer in the headlights look. I'm not the coach. I'm just standing there, really not being very useful, but just watching this scene unfold. So I said to the kid, move your hands up. You know what he did? He could hardly wait to move his hands up. Like they went up. I've never seen hands move up so fast. He wanted to do what the coach wanted him to do. He didn't understand what the coach was asking him to do. So all three of these points I've made, the red light, the due north, like pointing north when you're a little disoriented, and this thing about communication, all this falls under the word perspective. If I didn't call my class Parenting 201, I would call it Perspective Parenting. And all this has to do with making sure we understand what's going on in the minds of our kids. This isn't just for parenting. This is just good communication technique, period. Before you think someone else really needs to be come down on, or you really get upset with them, we would all do well to find out how do they see the same thing that we see. Because they probably are not seeing it the same way at all. They're just not. And I'm going to tell you, in my experience with 4 grown kids now, 9 times out of 10 in parenting, I did not need to do discipline in a situation where I thought initially that I did. 9 out of 10, I did not. Once I understood what that little person was really thinking and how they were looking at the same things I was looking at. So I'm going to give you one more thing. This is Allie. Allie has a permanent bad hair day. In fact, a lot of her hair is completely fallen out. When my daughter Kristen, who's now 32, was young, she had a surplus inventory of dolls. So I asked if I could have one to do this illustration in the parenting class. And so she gave me this one. This is Allie. And Allie lives in a duffel bag, which explains her unkempt appearance. But Allie gets to come out every so often. And I'm going to show you something I did with my kids. Now, most of you, looking at the group, have older kids or even maybe grandkids. You can do this with your grandkids too. I'm doing this with grandkids. But you can still do this, not exactly the way I'm going to show it to you. You can do this with adult children. And that's what I want to really hammer this home as our closing point. When Eric, my oldest son, was already past this point, but when our oldest daughter, who's now 32, was probably 18 months old, 2 years old, this idea occurred to me. This is what I did. I would hold her over my shoulder, like before bed, let's say, or before a nap. And I would have her little arm right here, and I would say to her, "Your daddy," I would take her arm, and I would touch myself. "Your daddy," so she could get the feel of who I was talking about. "Your daddy loves you. Your daddy loves you." And I would just repeat that. I would do that 4 or 5 times, and then I'd lay her down. I did this with the 3 youngest kids. I just hadn't thought of it when Eric was that young. After a little while, they get to be 2 or 3 years old. Then you can do this. You say, "Your daddy," and then you don't say anything. You wait for them to answer because they've learned, right? They've heard it enough. What do you think that they say the first time? I'll say, "Your daddy." What do they say? Loves you. Loves you. That's exactly what they say, Aaron, because they're just repeating back what they heard you say. So they'll say, "Loves you." And so over time, you explain to them, well, you can say, "Loves me." Right? So then you're saying, "Your daddy," and they say, "Loves me." To this day, my adult children, 25 to 35, when they're at the house, either they're in from out of town or they're at the house for an evening, when they go to bed at our house or when they get up to leave, I'll go to them and I'll say, "Your daddy." And it's almost like routine because they know it so well. But the thing that I want is when I'm gone, I want that to be drilled in, that they knew that in no uncertain terms, that that their daddy loved them their entire life. And this is what I want to tell you guys. Some of you guys have adult children, and they may need to hear that from you. They need to hear you say, I love you to start with. I'm guessing most of you in here do that, but if you don't, and I am talking to you, even though I don't know I'm talking to you, right? So don't feel singled out, because I don't know who you are. But if you think this is for you, it is. You've got adult children that need to hear you say, I love you. It's never too late. It's never too late to do that. And I would even encourage you to if you have a daughter, a grown daughter, I would take her face in your hand, just the two of you. Say, honey, I love you. And I want you to hear this from me. Your daddy loves you. And I would do that every time you see her, every time you part company, every time you meet. And with a son, maybe it's the face, maybe it's the shoulders, right? Let's not get too weird about this, but the point is you want those kids, even as adults, to hear from you that you love them in a way that they carry that with them after they part company with you. Because someday, chances are they'll outlive you. And you want that drilled into them before that point. You want them to know that even after you're gone, they never have to doubt that. And I'll tell you, with my little grandchildren, 7-year-old, I've got 4 that are born out. We have 1 on the way with our youngest son. Our daughter, the 32-year-old, has 4 kids. The oldest is 7, the next one's 5, the next one's about 2.5. All 3 of them, and I'm Baba. I wanted to be Grandpa. That was going to be my grandpa name. And when I said Grandpa a few times, my oldest grandson, when he was about 2 or 3, he said Baba. That was how he said Grandpa. So now I'm Baba. Like, I love the name Baba because I hardly ever hear of another Baba. So I'm Baba, and the kids can say it really young. I say to them, when we're with them, I get to tuck them in. Like, that's my job, and they look forward to it because you can't believe how ridiculously silly I can get. That's how I am with them when I tuck them in. So the last thing, though, is your Baba. And sometimes they'll say, loves me. Sometimes they say ridiculously silly stuff. Annalie, the little 5-year-old, for some reason, she likes to say loves cuckoo pants. I don't know why she says that. I don't know where that came from. And then she'll say, but Baba, I'm cuckoo pants. I'm going, okay, if you're cuckoo pants, then your Baba loves cuckoo pants. You know, you just get into their world. You just get into their world or meet them where they are. But you want them to know in no uncertain terms. So the other night, they were at our house, and I had a meeting at church. It was a meeting of some importance, and I didn't feel like I should miss it. I got home, they were already in bed. I went down at about 10 o'clock, and this was an absolute gift from God. They were both asleep. I go down, and I came up to Benjamin. He's laying in bed, and I kind of touched him and kind of gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he rolled over. And I just whispered in his ear, and he can be really silly too. He'll give me these silly, bogus answers all the time. I whispered in his ear, the 7-year-old, your Baba, and out came loves me. He was asleep. Then I got little Annalie sleeping on the floor. So I got down there, I gave her a kiss. She turned over and opened her eyes, like she was awake, but you could tell it was just a fleeting moment. And I said to her, you're Baba, and she said immediately, loves me. The next morning, neither one of them remembered any of that. They were both asleep. But I've drilled it in successfully, and they know their Baba loves them. In fact, Annalie now, when I say your Baba, she'll say with her little 5-year-old enunciation, loves his grandchildren. I think that's great. I'm great with that. So if you haven't ever done anything like that, even if your kids are grown, and especially with your grandkids now, or if you've got kids at home, I want you to drill in. Your daddy or your grandpa or whatever your grandpa name is, your daddy loves you. And you want them to be able to repeat back to you, loves me. Let me close our time this morning here at prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for each guy in this room. I saw so many hands go up as far as how many of them had more than one kid. I'm guessing almost everybody in here has at least one. I know many of us at our ages have grandchildren. We just thank you so much, Father, for those kids and those grandkids. We thank you for our adult children. What a blessing, even in the trials, even when things are difficult. What a blessing it is to have another person or several other people that you've entrusted to us to be their dads. I can't really imagine a greater honor. And I ask that every one of us would leave this room changed in whatever way you want us changed. That each guy in this room, me included, would leave with something we didn't come in with. I thank you for this time with these guys. I thank you for their commitment to be here this morning. Jesus, thank you so much for everything you've done for us and all the ways you've blessed us. It's in your name that we ask your guidance and wisdom and your blessing. And we commit all this to you, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, guys.